Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So welcome back to this last episode of MHNR 2020. We really hope you can hear us. If you can't, please tweet us, because that's how we found out last time. We're a very professional organisation. This is the mental health way, it's just to get back up and keep going. And I think, if anything, this conference has really, really epitomised kind of the best of mental health. I've really loved the fact that so many people have got a chance to show their presentations or online. If you're seeing ideas that interest you or motivate you, please check them out, because that's how we grow and learn. I think it's really important that we do that. And again, we'll have a panel discussion. Tonight, we're talking about older adults and end-of-life care, something that's incredibly important for us in mental health. I think COVID took us a little bit by surprise, as it did everybody, in terms of the fact that the types of end-of-life we normally deal with are sudden and quite shocking in mental health when they do happen. And this has been a very different experience for a lot of us, and we've had to recalibrate and retool our experiences. But also there's been a creeping change that maybe we haven't all been aware of as well, with the demographic changes has meant that we need to think very differently about the kind of care that we give, particularly towards the end of people's lives. The other thing about this conference that I've really loved, and I think the rest of the presenters will agree, is this fact that you guys have been there the whole time, encouraging us, supporting us, watching us, and it just made it so much easier to do and so much more fun. So really big thank you for that. And I'm just going to hand over now to Vanessa, who is going to be able to tell you how you can join in on this last one. And feel free to rib us for the audio difficulties. It's really not a problem. Vanessa.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, so if you can hear me, which you may or may not be able, hopefully you can, I'm just going to say a few words about how you can follow us tonight. So if you're on Facebook Live, hopefully, if you follow the Unite MHNA Facebook page, you should see the live stream. As Nikki says, if you can't hear it, if we have any more technical problems, do bear with us, tweet us, let us know as well. But hopefully everything will be running as normal now, and you can join in the conversation by adding any comments on the Facebook page, or you can go over to Twitter as well. If you're on Twitter, it's MHNR2020 as the hashtag tonight. You can follow the conversation, or you can ask us questions, or a bit of both. We'd like to hear from you. I think, as Nikki says, the audience is what's made this, really. For me, having attended MHNR a few years ago, the physical event, and I was quite blown away by how much I learned from it that day, but also had a sense that if only this could be more accessible to mental health nurses on the wards and that kind of thing, who often don't get time out. So this year, I think it's been a really great opportunity to extend the sort of exclusivity of it, and for you all to be able to join in to what's been a free event. We've all put it together for free, and if you're just tuning in at the end, you can also go over onto the Facebook page, look at the videos. You can look at YouTube. We'll post lots of links to the 2 weeks of events, and obviously we'll be back as well next week with MHTV. So I'll leave it there, and I'll hand over to. Am I handing over to Ben tonight or me?
To Mick.
To Mick. But thank you very much, Liz Collier, for confirming you can in fact hear. You may regret that when we all get going, because it's going to be a good one tonight. But I think let's hear from the panel. Mick, are you going to take us through?
Yeah, and I'd just like to agree with what everyone said up to now. I think the whole series of events have been absolutely fantastic. We've had a little bit of a glitch tonight, but what the heck. And I think I'm really pleased to be involved in tonight's show. I mean, it's closer to my own age demographic for one. But also, I think, what we're talking about here is a relatively neglected field of research and arguably a neglected area of practice as well. And it really shouldn't be. And I think we've got 3 great researchers on tonight who are passionate about making a difference in that regard. So I want to come to each of them in turn, and I'll take them in turn in relation to the order that I watch the videos in. So I'm going to go to Ben first. So Ben, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your study, and what you think are the important issues within it?
Thanks, Mick. My name is Ben Hannigan. I'm a mental health nursing academic at Cardiff University, and I'm here to discuss tonight an evidence synthesis that was funded by the National Institute for Health Research in the area of end-of-life care for people with severe mental health problems. And Mick, you were saying that we might be talking tonight about things that are neglected. Well, this is a really neglected area. we really don't know much at all about how end-of-life care for people who live a life with diagnoses of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, for example. We really know very little about how that's organised, how it's experienced, or how it could be improved.
Right, thanks, Ben. And the important stuff there, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of it as we go along. And we're probably going to ask you a bit about how you found out what you found out, what sort of methods you've used. But I want to turn to Gwen next, and Gwen's subject is close to my heart. So I used to work for a little while in dementia care services, and both my parents have had dementia. So I've got a sort of carer's interest in that as well. And Gwen's explored, well, you tell us yourself, Gwen, what you've been doing, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your study and what you think the main issues are.
Thanks, Nick. I'm Gwen MacInnes, and I'm a senior lecturer, University of Stirling up in Scotland. This study was part of my PhD. And my background is working with families and family caregivers. And I was always quite fascinated with why men appear to reach out for a different type of support. So I wanted to explore this really under-researched group of people. So previous research seemed to always focus on carers as just a homogenous group, and I wanted to find out more about the male's perspective caring for a partner with dementia. So I think it's been really enlightening for me as a relatively new researcher, but also really interested in relation to mental health nursing and interventions that would support the well-being of men.
Right, thanks, Gwen. And again, some really important issues there, and we'll come back to some of them at greater length as we go along. And I'm really pleased to have Doug MacInnes on this show. Similarly, I think we both share a background in secure mental health services. And if you don't mind me saying, Doug, I think if there was a mafia in a good way of secure care researchers, we'd have you as one of the godfathers.
Thank you very much, Mick. I'm not sure how I actually respond to that, to be honest. But I'm Doug MacInnes, mental health nurse academic from Canterbury Christ Church University. And as Mick said, a lot of my research is focused on people in secure settings. And the research I'm going to hopefully be talking about tonight is a series of studies that we've carried out with a number of colleagues in relation to older people and their access and engagement in secure mental health settings. And the reason why I think it's important, and I think that, as was mentioned by both Ben and Gwen, that it's a very researched, there's a lack of references for a lot of things in relation to older people in mental health settings. But in secure mental health settings, I think when they were initially set up, they were set up very much for younger people. And the services and the skills and the ways in which the procedures that were involved in secure mental health services were very much geared towards people who were physically healthy, were actually cognitive, didn't have any cognitive deterioration. And so it was very much related to mental health and potentially some of the risks surrounding behaviours. It didn't look at some of the needs of older people. And what has happened is actually, as secure services have developed, the numbers going into secure services or insecure services that are over 50 has moved from something like 5% in the 1980s to something like 25% now. And so they're a much bigger group, and they're a very under-researched and unknown group as well. So that's why I think they're important to look at.
So thanks, Doug. And I think, what I hear you saying there, and in line with both Ben and Gwen, is that these aren't just research and practice issues. There's sort of big, profound moral and ethical and policy issues at stake with a lot of these topics. So I'm sure we'll come back to some of that stuff. It also strikes me, having watched the various presentations on video, that there's, in some sense, a psychosocial thread running through all of them. Different in different ways for each study, but maybe if I come to each of you in turn again and ask if you could expand on what might be the key psychosocial issues. So how about you, Ben, for starters?
I would push that further, Mick, actually, and say I don't want to say biopsychosocial, but that's an overused word, isn't it? But we've also got the physical as well as the psychological and social in our end-of-life care, because our evidence synthesis sat right at the interface of two different bits of the healthcare system. So the bit of the health and social care system that is geared up to support people and their families in their expected last year of life, and then the other kind of health and social care system, which certainly I'm a lot more familiar with, and we on the panel probably are all much more familiar with, which is the bit of the health and social care system which supports people who live with long-term, often quite disabling mental health problems, where people might have diagnoses like, for example, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And what we found, despite all the kind of things that we hear about around things like parachute esteem, that people who live with long-term mental health problems should have access to all the same kinds of high-quality services, care that people with physical health problems have, is that this is a huge gap. You know, first of all, we don't know much about how psychological and social and physical care is provided to people with long-term mental health problems who are reaching the end of their lives in the UK. I think of the research studies we included in our evidence synthesis, I think only 3 of them actually have been conducted in the UK. So, and none of those had particularly set out to investigate how services could be improved, psychologically, socially, or physically. So it's a really, this is a really big area, but we know nothing about it at all. And it definitely has to address all these kind of 3 big areas of need, the bodily, the mental well-being, the psychological, and the social and the family.
Fantastic, Ben. And I suppose what I picked up as well is once you have those issues for individuals and you locate them within services, they do touch the other people who are in, the index clients' lives. You also mentioned palliative esteem, and I think that's one of these, almost a slogan. And I'm interested in the gap between the policy rhetoric and the reality on the ground. And I don't know whether you want to expand on that a little bit now.
I can do, because I think one of the things that was a little bit unusual about our evidence synthesis, because a lot of evidence syntheses or a lot of systematic reviews, all they'll include by design will be research studies, and we cast a much wider net than that. So we included research studies, but from the beginning we said, let's also include things like case studies, and let's also include things like policy documents and guidelines. Now, we limited that bit of our search just to UK policies and guidelines, because it would have been too big a task to try to get US and Australian and goodness knows what else policies and guidelines in the review. But there is a gap. There's a really policy for end-of-life care says that everybody, irrespective of diagnosis, should have access to high-quality care in their expected last year of life. So the policy direction, the rhetoric across all 4 countries of the UK is really, really, really clear. But in this particular group of people, so people who've lived a life with a long-term mental health problem, we excluded people with dementia, so people who've lived a life with, for example, bipolar disorder. This is such an underserved, under-prioritized, under-known group. It's for researchers, it's a wide open area. For researchers who want to then help improve services, it's a really, really important area, into which hopefully more people will move. And I should stop, shouldn't I? Lest I.
No, I think you've concluded your statement with a really interesting point there about, the research isn't just for its own sake. It's about hopefully improving services. So we may come back to that as well. And it might be the sort of work that you're doing there that's often unsung, like reviewing the literature that's already out there. It is a really important part of that ways in which we marshal the evidence and make things better in the long run. So
we see the evidence synthesis as being the beginning of a program of research.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right, so I want to come to Gwen, and like I said, I think I've got some personal and practice knowledge here that sort of shouts out to me that the family issues are really crucial in the context of dementia care. And I think what you've done, Gwen, is very nicely look at differences within that, particularly differences if the main carer is a man rather than a woman. So Could you tell us how you see the psychosocial issues, and maybe how they stack out in relation to gender roles in your
Absolutely,
study?
Yeah. For me, I suppose, just I was thinking about that, the sense of psychological and social elements that they came through in my study. I think from a psychological perspective, the kind of raw emotion that came through in interviews with the men that I had, where it was really kind of had an impact on me, and just listening to them talking about their experiences of, particularly around loss, and loss of their partner, loss of the relationship, loss of that common shared history, really came through from the men. And from a social perspective, I think again, this was an area really quite fascinating, was because so much of it was fixed around role and identity, and how taking on a caring role shifted the way they thought about themselves, and also was very much related to their sense of responsibility and their sense of duty in relation to being in a partnership relationship, and also how that then fitted with their experiences again of loss. So in this time, loss of role, loss of work, and loss of other aspects of their life that contributed to their sense of identity. So I think absolutely that this psychosocial elements really came through quite strongly in the research.
Thanks, and I suppose I hear from what you've said just then as well, Gwen. There's a certain amount of upset in the lives of the people that you're interviewing that may reveal itself in the course of you conducting an interview with somebody, which then might be quite upsetting for you as a researcher. So you touch on reflexive issues in your presentation. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head, Julie. I think I didn't really anticipate the kind of emotional experience of hearing those narratives and those stories and those experiences, and being expressed in such a really open manner as well. And I think for me personally, it was also challenging listening to older Scottish men who, quite traditional in their manner, and you physically see them trying to kind of bolster some sort of armour to prevent this kind of outpour of emotion, and watching that and being party to that, I found extremely difficult, and particularly around being a researcher and not a nurse, and I found that extremely difficult, and it was something that I just didn't anticipate at all, and it made me really think about my role and having that conversation and speaking to someone, listening to someone's story with a researcher hat on rather than a mental health nursing hat on, where you would probably take that conversation into a different place and offer different avenues of support. And that was closed to me because that wasn't what I was there for. And that was a very difficult experience, and something that I really relied quite heavily on my supervisory kind of group to work through, because I think it's something that as new researchers, we don't actually talk about it enough, about that emotional experience of transitioning from practitioner to researcher.
So I think your compassion and respect for your research participants comes over loud and clear, and in that sense, it does connect back, I think, into your identity as a nurse, and I think it's really moving hearing you talk about your research, and I really look forward to reading it when you've written it up fully. It's so fantastic. So we're going to come to Doug now. Doug. I think the psychosocial issues might be slightly different in the client group and the context that you're going to talk about, but nonetheless, I think there may be some important issues there. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think there are, and I think in a broader context, I think firstly, just to say that in terms of networks, quite often, the people that are older in secure settings have actually been around different forensic settings for quite a long time. A lot of the people we found in our survey had been there for 20, 30, 40 years within different forensic settings. So undoubtedly that's actually had an impact on how they form relationships with members of their family and etc. And in a lot of ways, what has happened is actually by proxy, staff and peers within those settings have actually taken on some of the roles and some of the friendships. So there's a lot of that actually happens within the environment. And I think the environment is a very important aspect of what we see, as in that actually replaces a lot of what you would, a lot of the support you would get in normal family situations or outside in the community. And so there is the notion of place and how important place is in terms of the care and treatment is quite manifest within the work that we've been done. And I think what we've also found in a previous study is one of the difficulties is because there's very few places there are for people who are older and have a forensic history, because you have the mental health needs, physical health needs, cognitive deterioration, and potential risk. It means that actually choice is virtually non-existent, either for the users themselves, or if they have family members, for family members as well. And actually that creates anxiety, it creates frustration, it creates the sense as well that at times people would be placed or would be looking to be placed in situations and in locations and environments that are really not right for them and for their needs, and actually are not something that they want to go to as well. So there's lots of issues around, and I think the issue about environment is a very big issue, because I think that with all those needs, there's very few places that people have the skills to be able to maybe help people, but also as well, it means that people quite often will be placed in situations and environments that they don't want and are really not good for their their care and their treatment and their future.
I think there's quite lots you're telling us about here, Doug, and I suppose at least some of it reveals for me why research is so important, because if there wasn't research that was nuanced like this, we might just assume that it's just getting out of secure units is the only thing that matters to people. And you're telling us that maybe because of the way people have developed relationships and the way that peer relationships develop, that getting out of the secure units for this client group is something of a mixed blessing.
Well, I think there are a number of factors around that, but definitely when we carried out a qualitative piece of work before, and the actual process of people moving or transitioning out was quite traumatic for a lot of them. They wouldn't have a clear sense of where they were going, and quite often moves would happen very quickly. Secondly, they would have very little choice, and there'd be very little, their preferences would be quite often, overridden might be too strong a term, but definitely they wouldn't be seen as a priority when, in terms of those transitions. So quite often they would also be moved quite quickly. So therefore, their ability to talk to people that they had known and respected and had really positive relationships with, to say goodbye, to actually to be able to sort of work through that process of leaving, was denied them.
Yeah, so the other thing that you said as well, Doug, was the importance of place and understanding place. And I think for me, of all the stuff that I read about mental health, some of the most exciting and interesting and illuminating writing at the moment is coming out of human geography, and people who are writing about really important issues that develop when we consider the places in which care goes on, or the places in which care is neglected. So I wonder whether we could turn to both Ben and Gwen now. And I think in your study, Ben, there's a really important issue around the right place to die.
Yeah, this was exactly coming into my head, Mick, as I was hearing your and Doug's discussion, and the importance of place and the importance of the environment. So when it came to when it came to our theming of the research and the policy and the guidance and the case studies that we had included in our evidence synthesis, so we did a whole theming. And one of the sub-themes that we had in the kind of narrative part, the thematic part of our evidence synthesis, we gave the title "No Right Place to Die." And I think actually that phrase came out of it might have come out of one of the qualitative papers. It might have been a quote that was cited in one of the primary research studies that we included in the synthesis. And so we had in this theme examples of research where, for example, nurses were saying, well, care for people with long-term mental health problems at the end of life it's simply lacking everywhere. It's mental health hospitals are not set up to care for people at the end of life. General medical units are not set up well to care for people who might be hearing voices, whose behavior might be kind of difficult to manage and challenging for medical nurses, for example. Hospices also are not necessarily set up or supported to care for people with psychosis, long-term mental health problems. I mean, there's nowhere that is the right place to die, let alone places which represent choice that people have made. Where I would like to die. This is which was another kind of theme that we talked about. But yeah, so place and environment was a really big part of our study for sure.
Yeah, and when I hear you all talk, I'm thinking that when we think of place and try and define different places, yes, we are talking about the built environment, and that's important in many ways, but we're actually talking about relational place and space as well, the quality of relationships within a place. And even on the sort of territory that I'm really interested in, the quality of control that you might have over the place that you're in, the extent to which you're involved in decision making. And that was something that came out quite loudly in your project, I think, when you spoke about involvement in decision making, lack of involvement in decision making. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think what came through was that men across the board felt that they lacked any power and influence in the decisions that were being made, and that wasn't necessarily just the sense of the decisions were made by other people. It was also that the decisions were inevitable due to dementia and the deterioration related to dementia, and feeling like one man spoke about feeling like he was on a treadmill, and that he had no control over the speed or where he was going or the path he was taking. It was other people making decisions and the condition itself that was determining the path ahead. And I think that was extremely difficult and very disempowering for the men. And also there was a fear. I mean, you spoke about the kind of right environment for people. There was a fear that the men were. It was a sense of they failed in their caring role if they had to look at alternative, care provision. That they weren't able to meet the needs of their partners. They felt that was their duty, and they'd failed in that duty. And also, a linked to that was the fear of that environment and having even less control. So if the person they were caring for was into hospital or a nursing home type setting, then they would even have less say and less control and less influence on the care that they received. And that also that fear about the media and what you see in the media around especially care home services, that fear of these environments that are quite negatively perceived in the media was of real concern to the men as well.
Yeah, I mean, my first job as a mental health nurse was in a residential dementia care home, and I think however much resources were put in then, and I think there were probably more resources then to make the place as homely as and welcoming as possible, most of the families who were involved in the place, it was their last resort. And to be honest with them, a lot of the things that had prompted admission were when a sole carer, usually a spouse who was also elderly, had sort of worked themselves, into the ground, caring on their own, and that had then necessitated the admission. Was that part of your findings as well, Gwen?
Yeah, it was, and I think that desire to care independently and not depend on other people was really strong. And again, I think that was really linked to gender and role and identity, and they very much because of this intense feeling of lack of control, they then pushed people back. So whether it be family members, children, other wider families and service providers, they would push them back because that allowed them to protect that space within the house and keep care and continuing even when their own health was deteriorating significantly. And 3 of the men went on to have considerable health problems, fairly clearly related to the stress and physical demands of caring, which then resulted in respite care and one for long-term care. So absolutely, I think that their own health needs was pushed to the bottom of the priority list, and also that unhelpful interactions with staff and key people, GPs, nurses, social care staff, social work, those initial interactions were really key, because if they didn't go well and they were seen as unhelpful, then the carer often then isolated and didn't engage in services.
So I suppose what we might hope for in terms of the impact of your work, Gwen, is that if people become more conscious of these more nuanced issues, we might do a better job of helping people actually receive support rather than push it away.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so how are we doing, Nikki, for questions from the audience? Have we got any? You're on mute.
Such a professional. We've got one from Vanessa, I think. There's somebody on Facebook who's commenting at the moment. Do you want me to read it? Yeah, go for it.
Go on then. So I was just having a conversation with somebody on Facebook then about them. We've got quite a few comments actually, so just bear with me. We've got
so Nikki Haley is talking about the fact that this is an NMC standard, and I think for a long time we've been able to not have to address it directly, but it is something that's in the new education standards as well, and it's just we're going to have to keep evolving our practice, and that's going to be something that's changing.
I think it's about the fact that definitely there are changes in the demographic and actually and in the clinical issues that are coming forward, and I think that's a big issue. And I think it's both from a nursing point of view, from other allied professionals as well, but also services and needing to actually think about how people with mental health problems do age with some dignity, basically.
I think Vanessa was the conversation that Vanessa was talking about, which I've just read, and it's very interesting. Bringing on this idea about mental health care in prisons and aging in prisons as well. Exactly. A couple of people are commenting on that.
I've had these fairly recent clinical experience of working in prisons, and for me what chimes is what's been said, I think, by Mick and Ben and maybe yourself as well, about it also being about policy, that things need to change at policy level and commissioning level, because there just aren't properly commissioned pathways in prison. For example, people with dementia, going right back to people having memory assessments in prisons and staff being skilled to understand when somebody might be developing dementia, for example, right through to, the end of life care discussion. There's a massive inequality, isn't there, in prisons in this area that isn't really talked about at all, particularly as people are living longer in the general population. We forget that people are living longer in prisons as well.
But they're also the biggest group to be now admitted to prison. I mean, partly that's due to the group of people who've had historical sex offences and been convicted and gone into prison, but they are the biggest grouping that are coming into prison or have been over the last few years. So there's a change in the actual prison population that, as you say, doesn't seem to have been reflected in policies and standards and actually practices.
Okay, I've got a few things that were burning questions for me. I want to turn to Ben and ask him a little bit about evidence synthesis, because I'm aware that we may all understand what this is, but some of our audience might not. So what is it, Ben, and why is it important?
I'll answer that. Can I just, and I will promise to do that, can I just very quickly respond to what Vanessa, you've just said? When we were funded for this evidence synthesis, the funding body, the National Institute for Health Research, said, please do this study, or we're happy for you to do this study, and can you please also make sure that you include any research on end-of-life care for people with severe mental health problems in prisons? So we looked for research in that area, and we did not find a single study in the English language anywhere in the world, as I recall. So there we are. And evidence, then to answer your question, Nick, an evidence synthesis maybe makes it easy for me to say something like that with a reasonable degree of confidence, because what we did, in an evidence synthesis, you try to find pretty much, I mean, you set your parameters, you set your boundaries, you try to find kind of as much as there is to know about your given area. So you've got to really focus your questions very carefully. It really helps to work with an information specialist, which we did in this study. So you have all sorts of very kind of carefully worked out search terms, and you search lots and lots and lots and lots of databases. And then you end up with, we had literally thousands of citations. So we had lots and lots of titles of research reports and and we included policy documents. So we had to search online for those. And then you've got and you can't kind of shortcut this, the job of considering, well, do they meet the criteria? Are they in, are they out? And sometimes you have to discuss that with 2 or even 3 people. And eventually you kind of filter it down to this much smaller number of research papers, typically research papers, maybe other things too, like in our study. And then you do things like you assess the quality of the research. So if you've got 100, we had 104 items. So of the research items in our 104 publications, was it good research? Does it kind of meet quality standards? Is it something you'd want to recommend to students to read as good examples of how research should be done? And then when you've done that, then we started thematically synthesize. So then we looked at the content. So what are the people saying in these research studies? And it was through that we ended up with themes like the structure of the system, like no right place to die. So an evidence synthesis allows you to, it gives you, it's like a literature review with knobs on, basically.
Yeah. So what I like about it, Ben, is that, do you know when evidence-based practice or evidence-based medicine was first forced upon the world, there seemed to be quite a simplistic view of what counted as good evidence.
Yeah.
And it was usually, if it wasn't a randomized controlled trial, it didn't count.
Yes.
And yet in our field, and especially listening to you all tonight, lots of this territory that we're researching is so complicated that you would spoil it or alter it too much by subjecting it to trial-based design studies necessarily. So I'm not saying trials are rubbish, but what I am saying is that the synthesis approach respects other evidence equally and allows you to draw conclusions across a continuum of methodologies, not just singular methodologies. And I think you need to be applauded for taking that approach. And it then allows us to neatly turn to Gwen and Doug for a comment on the value and appreciation for qualitative methods, maybe the particular qualitative methods you've both used. So if we turn to Gwen first, maybe.
Yep. Well, I used IPA, so interpretive phenomenological analysis, and I that really resonated with me, and just how I interacted with the data and how the analysis was undertaken, and also just going back to the previous point about that kind of researcher engagement in it, and recognising that you are going to influence and interpret based on what you know and understand about the concepts that you're exploring. And it's not about saying that that's right or wrong. It's just about saying it is. That is part of the process, and bringing that to the surface and exposing that and being transparent about it, rather than trying to cut it away and remove it. Because the risks of doing that from my study, I feel, is that you then lose that fine detail, and you lose that real personal story, that personal narrative that you've been part of in that research interview.
Yeah, and what you've done using that methodology is to really hone in on and respect and privilege the actual lived experience of the people you've spoken to, and the meaning that they make out of their own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, and just even hearing and listening back to the interviews, even after the analysis phase, and just you can hear the men making sense of their experiences as they're talking through it, and that's really unique and really kind of privileged experience to have.
Cheers. So using one of my favourite metaphors, we're actually getting last orders called on us. So Doug, I'm going to turn to you. If you've got a brief comment about the value of qualitative methodology, please give us it. But also I'm going to turn to you all in turn and ask for if you've got a pithy, important closing remark to make for us before we wrap up.
Okay, I suppose my perspective on qualitative research, I'm much more of an adherent to mixed methods, because I think there's and based on whatever the question is, that you can get a much more rounded view from both a quantitative and a qualitative perspective, and hopefully combine the two. So that would be my pithy comment on that. In relation to the pithy comment about my work, I think what it's showing is that there is a massive gap in the skills base and the service provision for a particular group of people at the moment, and that is people who are growing older in secure care, who are likely to become more older, more frail, have much more complex needs as time goes on over the next few years. So therefore there's a need for actually us as practitioners to think about what are the skills that need to be developed to be able to cope and to deal with them in a real holistic and human level, but also as well what services may need to be taken forward in relation to this. So that's my pithy comment for you, Mick.
Thanks, Doug, and I like the way you've stressed humane and humanity there. So brilliant. So can I turn to you now, Gwen?
Yep. For me, I think a key point, I think for me, would be we need to be better at understanding the unique experiences of individuals. We talk about person-centred care. We need to extend that to families and their experiences when we're working with them, to avoid unhelpful interactions.
Thank you. And you, Ben, last word?
My last word is that end-of-life care for people with severe mental health problems is a wide open area for researchers, and is also an area that practitioners also, I think we would all do well to pay more attention to.
Brilliant. So I think it's been a great show, and I think I've really enjoyed it. I think we've spoken about some really profound and important stuff here. So I hope the audience have got as much out of it as I have. Maybe for another day, my closing remark is, and I'm not looking for an answer right now, is that some of what we see in terms of the detrimental long-term health of people with mental health diagnoses may be to do with what we do to them, the treatments that we give to them. But I think I don't want to put us on a downer. Let's discuss that another time. So thanks very much, everybody. I think it's been a great episode.
Absolutely. It has. Can we just, is there anything Vanessa wanted to add before we head out? Because it's the last one, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comments that we've had online tonight, we've had quite a few comments, and just to say to people, because we're running low on time, we will go back and look through the feed and make sure that we've answered everyone's questions. And if there are questions for particular panel members, we can, I'm sure, refer those back to people to answer. But I think the general conversation really reflects what everybody's been saying. There's a lot of comments about us still being in an ageist society, for example, and I think that reflects some of what we said in prisons, that the prison population is neglected, but older people in prisons are neglected even more. And I think, you know, what Ben said about there being no research in prisons at all in this particular area is pretty shocking, isn't it? So I think highlights the need for more research. So like everyone, I could say a lot more, but conscious that we're drawing to a close and it's our last session. And I guess, just to reflect our last session of 2 weeks, Nikki, isn't it? And everybody, and what 2 weeks it's been. It's going to feel strange next week having my evenings back, but it's been absolutely brilliant. And if you've been watching this throughout, then we hope you've got lots out of it. If you've just tuned in tonight, then have a look at all the videos that we've uploaded, and we will keep an eye on the Twitter feed as well over the next few days and add any comments to it there. So thank you everybody.
Absolutely. It just remains to say, I think, thank you to our panel who bore with us with the kind of grace and forbearance that you would expect from mental health professionals. Beautifully done. And I think tonight, it hasn't gone terribly smoothly in one way, but another way, it's very mental health, isn't it? We've figured out a problem and we've fixed it between us. If I can't think of a better way of summing up mental health at the moment, we're having to flex and change quite a lot. So if you haven't been able to catch up all this, absolutely go through the hashtags and catch up. But don't forget, we're back with MHTV next week. And the only thing left to say is thank you to Dave, who was going to be joining us tonight, but obviously because we're running so short of time, we can't go without saying thank you very much. So we'll see what we can do in finding some nice embarrassing pictures of him and tweeting those out for you, hopefully later on, so that you can see the man behind the fabulous creation that's been this year's MHNR.
And Nick, before you sign us off, Nikki, absolutely here. So Mick, you and I are here because I'm here as a guest today, but you and I, Mick, have been involved, you know, in the MHNR 2020 enterprise. We're here because we're members of the conference organising committee, aren't we? So for me, I want to say, okay, to Dave, to Nikki, to Vanessa, setting up MHTV it was May, wasn't it? You did this, I think. Through doing that, you have allowed us and supported this conference to happen. And we are really, really, really grateful to you for that. It's a really, 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 really big deal, and you deserve lots and lots of praise and lots of thanks for that.
Oh, that's lovely. And I think on that one, we better say good night to everybody, so we can have a proper old loving and a drink. Be nice. End of conference. So thank you very much, everybody. Good night. Take care. Bye-bye.
3, 2, 1.
Welcome to tonight's episode of MHNR 2020.
Yeah, that didn't work.
No.